On this episode of China Unscripted, 19 days of non-stop Hong Kong coverage, a PR disaster for Carrie Lam and her government, and what will happen after people broke into the legislative headquarters. Hi, welcome to China Unscripted. I'm Chris Chappell.
I'm Shelley Zhang.
And I'm Matt Canesta.
Well, this is our last day in Hong Kong, so we decided we would do sort of a wrap-up of our time in Hong Kong. Do you guys even remember how we ended up coming here?
We live here now,
ago.
right?
No, Shelley, we still have a home in New York.
I thought I was just going to stay in this hotel forever.
It did sort of seem like that. There was just a sort of an endless stream of things that kept happening. So when we came to Hong Kong, we basically didn't buy a return ticket because we were, just going to see what happened. We were pretty certain we were only going to stay like a couple of days, a week at most.
A week, yeah. We were living in the moment.
Yeah, I think I talked with Matt about this, but we both planned in advance, so we took a whole week's worth of clothing because no way we'd ever use all of that.
Oh, really? No
Really.
way? Okay.
Really.
Well, also we didn't realize how hot it was in Hong Kong and the fact that, you could sweat through two outfits in a day or
Yeah, well, I was also wearing a suit for the first half. Eventually I realized I'm not going to survive if I wear a full suit in Hong Kong.
Hong Kong broke Chris.
Hong Kong broke me.
It was kind of fun for me, actually, because it was June 12th. The protests had just happened in Hong Kong, where the tear gas had used... wow, I'm doing great. Where the police had used tear gas on the protesters.
Are you sure? I seem to remember the tear gas using the police. Tear gas launching the police at protesters. This is not funny to anyone but sleep-deprived, dehydrated us.
I had a story I was telling.
You were telling us how...
So after the tear gas launched police at protesters on June 12th, then it was the morning of June 12th in New York. And we decided that we should probably go to Hong Kong. So that was the day that we bought a ticket in the morning for that evening.
I actually have a very strong... Because a few days before, during the 1 million person march against the extradition bill, which should we really recap that quickly for people who have not...
In case you have not been paying any attention to anything we've been doing for the past 3 weeks, I'm very hurt, first of all. But the extradition bill was a proposed bill by the Hong Kong government that could give authorities... they could have authorities in Hong Kong send people to mainland China for trial. And I'm sure you can, if you don't know why that's a problem, you must never have listened to a single thing we've done.
Thanks for, being a new listener.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. We're really fun. Keep listening. But in case you didn't know, China has a 99.99% conviction rate. So people in Hong Kong were a little concerned that this wouldn't be good for them.
Yeah, technically the Hong Kong government put in some safeguards, it had to be for a crime that was punishable by more than 7 years in prison.
Well, no, that was a compromise. Originally, it was crimes that would be punishable by a year.
And then
they kept
as the
extending
Chinese
it.
leadership says, safeguards, schmafeguards.
Man, I'm about to launch a police at you.
But so there were safeguards and then they were we won't put certain white-collar crimes or certain political crimes in there because different sectors of businessmen were worried about all of the bribes that they had to pay in mainland China and whether they could be arrested for those, part
of political power struggles.
Yes, and then there were also people worried about demonstrating in Hong Kong, that's illegal in China. So the government was trying to reassure people, and then that reassured no one, actually.
Yeah, the main thing I've learned being out here is that people in Hong Kong don't trust the Hong Kong government.
I wonder why.
Well, it could be the fact that they don't elect their chief executive. The legislators that they elected got expelled by the pro-Beijing faction, and they basically have no say in the government now.
Well, people kept getting arrested years and years later for peacefully protesting.
At the Umbrella Movement in 2014. Also the occasional abductions of Hong Kong people by mainland China. So,
Yes.
yeah.
So anyway, it was Sunday, June 9th, and 1 million people took to the streets in Hong Kong to protest this, and that was just an absolutely massive protest, even compared to previous protests in the city.
Yeah, the city only has 7 million people.
Yeah, I mean, I remember watching this happen that day and like looking at my Twitter feed, and I was like, oh my gosh. And then I remember saying to you, Matt, what if we have to go to Hong Kong?
And I was like, oh, come on, like we can just cover from the studio. And partly this was because we'd just gotten back from a week in Norway, and I was exhausted. And like normally I'm the one who's like, oh yeah, like let's go to that other country.
Adventure Matt, yeah.
Yeah, like Adventure Matt wants to, Adventure Matt, books a cruise on a Filipino fishing boat to take us out to the South China Sea to confront the Chinese ships.
Yeah.
But tired after Norway Matt says, let's just stay in the studio. And a couple days pass, and then
The tear gas fired police at the protesters, and we were like, okay, we're going back to Hong Kong.
Yeah, I remember because I work another day job in addition to working on China Uncensored. So I was
Yes,
at my...
we can't pay Shelley well.
No. So we can support 3 people just about, which includes our video editor, Seamus, but not 4. And so like I was at my day job, and then I got a call from Chris and Matt who were like, hey, we're going to go to Hong Kong. Do you want to? And I was like, we are?
Well, we gave you the option. Of
Yeah,
not
yeah,
coming.
no, you asked if I wanted to come and then I was like, all right, now I need to go tell my job that like, hey, I know I was just in Norway for a week, but guess what? But you know what? I'm a freelancer, so, and also the people at my work are very supportive of what I do. So they're like, oh yeah, go do things that happen in the real world. But yeah, then I was like, when are we going? And you're like, 2 a.m. tonight.
So we basically didn't sleep for that first day, and then arrived in Hong Kong. And very quickly we realized that nobody could predict anything that was going to happen.
Yeah, we had interviewed someone the next day, on that Saturday, and he's like, oh, well, the protest tomorrow probably won't be as big as the 1 million that happened a week ago.
Well, because Carrie Lam had given a press conference where she
yeah.
was like, did she apologize then?
No, that was we're going to postpone the bill.
extradition
Yeah,
bill.
well, let's back up a little bit. So, like, we left Wednesday or Thursday morning at 2 a.m. We got in Friday morning into Hong Kong. And then, were you guys nervous at the border control?
That whole thing. Oh, yeah, I was definitely nervous about whether or not we could actually get into Hong Kong.
Right, because our friend Benedict Rogers had been stopped at the border about a year and a half ago, right?
Yeah, and also there was the foreign policy?
The Financial Times.
Financial Times reporter who was also denied entry into Hong Kong.
Well, he was in Hong Kong already, and then his journalist visa was denied, so then he couldn't get back in.
Yeah, so we were definitely concerned, because we're very big and important that, we would have been on their radar.
I mean, the first time we came to Hong Kong in 2014, we had 66,000 subscribers. So that wasn't really... I remember we didn't tell anybody we were going.
Yeah, we played it pretty hush-hush.
Just in case. But, I didn't think that there would be a way that they would block us. And also, they hadn't blocked anyone, really, at that point. And 2016, when we were here, everybody was just incredibly depressed. And also, there was not, a major news story going on. So, that wasn't a concern either, that we wouldn't be able to come into Hong Kong. But this time, in the intervening almost 3 years now, then that's when the Benedict Rogers things, the Financial Times journalist, and, it felt like this is a moment of high tension. Yeah.
But the good news is we were still way under their radar, and we got in.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, even with 800,000 subscribers, we're not that important.
I guess not.
No, and I hope to remain well under their radar.
Yeah. So how can we be the biggest and most influential TV show about China, but also not be on the Chinese Communist Party's radar?
Fake names?
Bribes?
These are
Matt,
both good suggestions.
What's your idea?
Close your eyes, put your fingers in your ears, and say la 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 la.
I don't know how that would work. In fact, I think if somebody showed up in Hong Kong doing that...
They would just be detained.
They'd just be detained straight away. But yes, we managed to get in. Although while we were in Hong Kong and all these protests were happening, another friend of ours, Zhou Feng Suo, who was a Tiananmen Square massacre survivor and whom we recently interviewed, he was denied entry into Hong Kong. He flew to the airport, and it seems like security guards kind of roughed him up a little bit and dragged him out of the country and threw him on a plane to Taiwan.
Well, actually, they tried to throw him on a plane back to the U.S., and somehow he got on a plane to Taiwan instead. Yeah. So that was, and also, like, we met Zhou Fensuo at the Umbrella Movement protest back in 2014.
Yeah, that's when we first met him.
And I was having a conversation with him just a few days ago on Twitter where he was like, oh, you guys are in Hong Kong. I wish I could be there with you now. You know, like, I still remember the Umbrella Movement, and, like, you know, that memory stays with me every day. So then he tried to come, and yeah.
Yeah, so we're a little worried about next time.
I just hope they let us out.
Yeah, we're coming to you from Hong Kong, maybe forever.
I don't think that's going to be a
Probably
problem.
not. They probably want us out of here if they even know who we are.
I'm going to go with do not know who we are.
Probably. But so back to the unpredictability thing about all of this. So Carrie Lam had said they were going to postpone the extradition bill, and so some people were like, okay, so the protest isn't going to be that big on Sunday. Well, the first thing that happened isn't that when we, like, were walking to Admiralty and we kind of bumped into, like, a swarm of protesters going to the police headquarters? Or was that after?
That was after.
All right.
We've forgotten everything that's happened.
Okay. We have not. I just forgot the order. But so obviously, Sunday's protest was even bigger than the million protests the week before. There was 2 million people there. Or as Carrie Lam said, tens of thousands of people.
Well, I mean, the Hong Kong police has a reputation of vastly underestimating the number of people who protest. And then the organizers have a reputation of somewhat inflating. But this time, the Hong Kong police's numbers were really low because they were only counting the people who were on the main parade route between the time that they had given the permit for the parade to take place.
Where the reality was,
there were so many people, they spilled onto 2 separate side streets and took over the streets completely.
And they were going well into the night, so
yes.
well beyond when the official time for the parade was over.
And I remember at that point, that was the first parade we had seen in Hong Kong, so we weren't here for the 1 million, so we were like, we have no idea how big this is. Is this really big? This seems really big to us.
It seems at least like tens of thousands of people.
Yeah. And then, like, we were standing on this sky bridge looking over both of the huge streets that the protesters were on. And then, like, 2 hours later, other reporters were there, and there was still the same massive numbers of people. And that's when I was like, oh,
It's a lot of people.
maybe this is bigger than I thought.
That was also when
Yeah.
we did a live there, and that's something we did on this trip.
Was that our first
I don't.
live?
We tried
The first
yes.
live
hotel.
was in a hotel room.
Yes, that's our least interesting live, really.
Yes, that was just a sort of a troubleshoot test. But yeah, that was one of the exciting things about this trip is we experimented doing with YouTube lives.
And now we did 11 of them. Or 14 if you count the one we did
Over 3 separate...
over 3 separate ones because there were so many technical
Internet problems.
internet problems.
Yeah. But so basically after 2 million people took to the street, we were like, okay, we probably need to extend our trip by, all right, 1 more week. We'll only be here 2 weeks.
Yes.
Absolutely the most.
Yeah, because there was already kind of... They were like, okay, you know, what's Carrie Lam's, you know, reaction going to be? Like, they're calling for her resignation. They're calling for the bill to be completely withdrawn. Maybe the government's going to make another move. And then that night they issued a press statement that was like an apology in the third person.
It was like, the Hong Kong chief executive recognizes that there has been some miscommunication.
And deeply apologize. Like, it was just very weird. But then she came on TV.
I mean, Matt also agrees that it's weird.
Stick the fingers in the air, la 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 la.
But then she came on, she had this press conference the next day where, like, it was really incredible. Like, it was really incredible to watch because it was very apparent that she could not say
certain things. Well,
certain
she
things,
gave,
yeah.
like, her prepared speech was kind of all right. It's like, oh, like, okay, she's
she
really
really
apologizing.
apologized. She apologized. And
Yeah.
some people were like, this is a pretty good apology from Carrie Lam.
But then, when the reporters started to ask her questions, it became clear she was not good at damage control.
No, I think as she continued to explain, as reporters continued to try to press her to say that the government was actually withdrawing or retracting the bill, she just could not use those words. She was basically like, the bill, like, if it doesn't come up again, it's dead. Like,
Yeah.
but she just wouldn't be like. So it was interesting to see that maybe there's some kind of red line from the Communist Party, the Beijing government, saying like what you can say and what you can't. So that was pretty.
Yeah,
It's pretty interesting.
And so basically that meant that the protest movement never really died away completely. There was always like something happening.
And then the protesters had then issued kind of like something saying that like they would give the government until that Thursday
That's right.
to
Meet
respond.
their 4 demands.
Yeah, or I forget, I think it was Thursday. Yeah, to respond.
Yeah, it was Thursday, 5
and
p.m.
then if they didn't respond with it, then there would be more actions taken.
Quote, unquote.
Yeah. So yeah, this, like, I think, did we mention this? Like how every time everybody's predictions were wrong. I think we started talking about it, but then
Yeah.
Oh, right, because then the next day, that Friday, there was going to be something happening at Ledgeco, some protest, and we were on our way over there, and we passed
Just
by.
in case we didn't explain it, Ledgeco is the legislative offices, the seat of the Hong Kong government.
Yeah, it's
Right.
short for Legislative Council.
Yeah.
It's like the Congress, right? Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, Carrie.
Yeah, no, so we were on our way to Ledgeco for where the protests were going to be.
Where they were supposed to
And
be.
we just happened to walk next to the police headquarters that's a few blocks away. And we saw people walking in the opposite direction.
A flood of people.
Yeah, a flood of people in the face masks that everyone here is wearing to protect their identities. And they were walking to the police headquarters, and we're like, hey, where are you guys going? And they're like, police headquarters. And I was like, what's the plan? They're like, well, we don't know. We're just going to police headquarters.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the way things happen here. And so we get there, and there's like, at least 100 people. Within 5 minutes, there were like 300 people. And we're like, okay, this is getting big. And we set up kind of on a perch on this railing of an overpass where protesters, it looked like they were going to start to shut down traffic there. And within like 30 minutes, there were at least a couple thousand
And
people there.
it kept growing. Basically, they sat outside police headquarters for 15 hours. I mean, the interesting thing about that day was that was the day that they were like, oh, there's going to be action. So we had gone earlier that morning to Ledgeco already, kind of like walked around, looked around, been like, all right, there's some people here.
Not much was
Not much is happening. And we're like, maybe. And like for days already, they'd have been kind of like around there, like after the 2 million person parade on Sunday, like they had kind of hung out outside Admiralty, and then they kind of like taken over the street for the night.
But it was kind of a lull, and so
Yeah.
we were thought like, especially that morning, it's like, okay, I guess we won't be sticking around. That
Yeah,
long.
like maybe this is it. They're just going to come here again, kind of like come to the traditional protest area, maybe shut down a few streets. The government's going to continue to ignore them, and maybe this dies
Peter
down. Yeah.
And then they occupied the
But
police
little did we
headquarters.
know.
Yeah, well, that's what was one of these things is like they keep, like it's so unpredictable for everybody, even
Yeah.
sometimes like the protesters themselves, because they're constantly talking on like these messaging apps like Telegram or this online forum that's been called, it's lihkg.com, and it's been called like the Reddit of Hong Kong. So it's just like this forum that's kind of like BBS, where people can upvote certain suggestions and like have conversations and stuff like that. So everybody's been kind of surprised by the things.
Yeah.
I remember feeling very surprised that day because I was like, all right, wow, they just took it to the police.
Yeah, they barricaded them in so they couldn't get out, and the police response was pathetic. They were like, because they blockaded us in, emergency vehicles couldn't get out, which was not true because they were letting ambulances come in and out very easily. And then they were like, well, there was somebody like very sick with cancer inside and a very pregnant woman who couldn't get out. And everyone's response was like, what were they doing in the police headquarters?
Also, they were letting the civil servants out. But of course, you could understand if people were a little nervous about coming out.
Yeah, they might have been
by
nervous,
themselves.
but the protesters were so polite. Like it was ridiculous.
Well, they weren't that polite at night, but yeah.
They were okay. They were a little less polite at night, but during the day, I mean, we were there for a couple hours, and we saw protesters. They were handing out water. They were handing out these cooling patches that people would wear. They were handing out snacks like Ritz crackers. They even came around with some Pocari Sweat, which may one day be a sponsor of China Unscripted.
It's an electrolyte drink, very necessary.
It's like Gatorade,
weather.
yes. Although the first time I ever looked at Pocari Sweat, I was like, "That's a really weird name." But now I'm just
It
used
makes
to
me
it.
think of like a they take a Pokemon and they squeeze it to get all the sweat out.
Yeah, that
Oh,
was
great!
Alan's
Now I'm not
thing.
gonna be able to drink that again.
That was Alan's thing that we talked about back in 2014 when we were here for the Umbrella Movement.
Oh man.
Yeah. So at any rate, so we didn't know that was going to happen, and then after that, we're kind of like, well, July 1st isn't that far away. Maybe we should just stay.
Stay
Do you guys
till
want to
then.
stay? I don't really want to stay.
Well, yeah, like we kind of felt that like there could be more stuff going on after that Friday, right? So. They stayed outside police headquarters for about 15 hours. At night, it started to get a little rowdier. People started graffitiing the police headquarters, throwing eggs.
And that was when they taped up the
Yes.
security cameras because they didn't want to actually damage the equipment. They just taped it up.
Yeah, so they were, but it definitely got a bit more heated that night. So we're like, okay, we should, and people kept being like, oh, the next big protest is going to be July 1st, which is the traditional protest day, since it is did we talk about this
We
now?
haven't talked about
So it is the July 1st, 1997 was when the British handed over Hong Kong to the Chinese Communist Party. So like it was like the anniversary of like, one country, two systems and all these things. And so there's a protest every year that people celebrate with because they're fiercely protective of the freedoms that they can still have under one country, two systems that people can't have in mainland China, like protesting. So that's their kind of like kind of trolley way in a certain sense of celebrating their handover day. So
And I'm very glad we did decide to stay because July 1st was very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, in between, we're definitely doing interviews with interesting people.
Yeah, but you can check that out,
yeah.
I guess, on China Uncensored.
Yeah, I think we put, like, how many videos have we put out?
We
since
definitely
we've
put
been
up a lot of
It's
videos.
way because normally we're doing Monday, Wednesday, and Friday episodes on China Uncensored. So like 3 a week, sometimes 4 a week, but this was way more. Plus we did 11 live broadcasts in less than 3 weeks. So that's also
Yeah.
a lot.
We're already like kind of glossing over like the whole G20 protests they arranged.
Oh,
which,
well, we can go back and talk about that.
I don't know. I think like in the context of thing that actually ended up being like less important. But a quick summary of that is protesters. One of the things they organized is they went from the G20 happened while we were here, and so the day before that, protesters went to the 19 consulates of those G20 countries, obviously leaving out China for obvious reasons, and asking the leaders of those countries to talk about Hong Kong at the G20 because China had been like, no one is allowed to bring up Hong Kong.
Yes. And then what was interesting was that was another one of those things that was an unexpected move.
Yeah.
Like after they went to police headquarters on that Friday, then that Tuesday night again they were at police headquarters all night, and the police cleared that protest eventually. But police were trying to be restrained. They weren't using tear gas. They were just kind of like using the riot shields
No more
and
tear
stuff.
gas firing police at protesters.
Because like after they fired 150 rounds on June 12th, that was such bad PR for them. Because police brutality became one of the kind
The
of
themes
rallying
of it,
cries of the protest.
And there was just so much press
Oh yeah.
everywhere, especially because on that June 12th night, they like specifically targeted press, which is a great way to get the press upset and coming to report on everything. that
Yeah,
happens.
and then that's how all this international press, like us,
Yeah, like us.
decided to come. But it was interesting because, like, you think, all right, well, maybe they're going to now kind of take it to the police. They're going to be at LegCo. They're going to be at the police headquarters. The government doesn't respond anymore. Maybe it'll die down again, right? And then they decide, okay, if our government's not responding to us, what we do is make this an international issue. Like, remind the world that Hong Kong has been in the past and is supposed to still be for at least another 20-some years a bastion of freedom where you can come and do your international business. And are you going to watch as we get swallowed up?
And it might affect your business interests too.
Yeah. Are you just going to sit back and watch? Is that what you're going to do? Yeah. So in addition to kind of going around to the consulates, they did this interesting crowdfunding campaign.
Oh yeah, they in 12 hours, was it, Shelley? They raised like
6.7 million Hong Kong dollars.
Or was it 6.4?
6.7.
6.7. Yeah,
That's
Hong Kong dollars.
Almost 800,000 US dollars.
Yeah.
And they used that money to put ads in major newspapers. So when the G20 leaders met in Osaka on Friday, they would see the front pages of these newspapers, and they would start talking about it amongst themselves, amongst the staff. And world leaders read newspapers typically.
Well, I think it was also not just like Japanese newspapers, to be clear. Like they did it in like the newspapers of all the different G20 countries. So then you had like a full page ad in the New York Times, a full page ad in the Globe and Mail, like a full page ad in the Guardian, like all of these, several Japanese newspapers, several Korean newspapers, Taiwanese. So the idea was like, now this is becoming like a thing that they're trying to bring to international attention.
Yeah, and it worked to some degree. I mean, Shinzo Abe brought up Hong Kong. I don't know all the world leaders who brought that up.
Pompeo said that Trump was going to. I don't know if he did, because I'm not sure that got reported.
It's hard to know what happens.
Yeah.
Like, there can be a lot of things that happen at the G20 that don't get reported because it happens behind closed doors. So we just happened to hear about the Shinzo Abe bringing it up.
Yeah.
So obviously, pro tip for China's communist leaders: if you don't want people to talk about something, don't tell them that they're not allowed to talk about it. It doesn't work very well.
But it works inside China.
Where you have the jurisdiction to arrest people, it does.
Yeah.
That's the difference. If only they could take over the whole world, then they could control the conversation.
Hey, do not give them ideas.
Something to look forward to.
Well, it's not my idea. It's their idea.
That's probably true. But they care about territorial sovereignty. But yeah, now that I'm taking a moment to think about it, like we were about to jump to July 1st, and still there was so much that happened. There was the second siege of the police headquarters.
Right, that happened before the G20.
Yeah, where they surrounded the police headquarters again. This time they spray painted security cameras, like they were willing to actually do some property damage this time. Police recruitment posters were torn down, although I think that happened the first time, but...
I kind of forget how they ended up in front of police headquarters the second time.
Well, the protests, unlike the 2014 umbrella movement, were very decentralized. They sort of came to decisions as like a group, either like with a group of people deciding on the scene or using social media.
Right. We talked a little bit about Telegram and the other forms that they use. But also, they ended up occupying different government offices too. That like the immigration office, the revenue office, which is like the IRS kind of like. So they would go in kind of occupy for a little bit and then like shut it down and then leave. It wasn't like an occupy forever movement.
Umbrella movement. Like they could go shut down some streets or like a major government building and then just leave later. And then there was also the pro-police rally.
Oh yeah, I'm a little sad we missed that.
Yeah, I think we had been doing something else. Oh, I think we were
interviewing
people.
mainland people at the tourist sites.
And had heat stroke. And so what happened with that was basically, it was a couple hundred, or was it even more than that?
Oh, it was more than that.
It was like,
Organizers said 165,000. It was pretty big. They did end up taking
Yeah.
over part of the road down by Ledgeco.
so this was a pro-police rally, which was essentially a pro-Beijing.
Yeah, there's
rally.
these people called, like the locals call them blue ribbons, which they kind of come out and support police and support law and order and stuff like that. But it's kind of like pro-Beijing, and they're almost, I've never seen a young person.
Yeah, they're
like
all
the-
older.
They're all older. I mean, there's always rumors about whether people are paid for these kinds of things. Like, I'm not really, I don't know for sure.
Right, but I mean,
one way
to
or
be
the-
fair, there's on the other side, there's rumors that the anti-extradition bill people were funded by the CIA or these other various groups.
Oh yeah, we had a person who came up to us at our fan meetup who was like, "Yeah, I'm in one of those photos that like the pro CCP tabloids publish and say that like these are the CIA agents."
And
This
he
guy
was
was-
Canadian.
Yeah. So
Let's just say the CIA is getting smart in who they pick to
Yes.
represent them.
exactly.
According to the tabloids, it seems to be kind of white guys with glasses and T-shirts.
Randomly photographed in Hong Kong.
But at any rate, there was the police, the pro-police rally where a lot of people were waving the little red People's Republic of China flags.
And they were tearing up like all of the like protest posters and artwork
Yeah, yeah.
the anti-extradition protesters had been putting up over
There's
the
this
past
kind
couple
of
weeks.
tradition of like Hong Kong protest art in a certain sense. Like we saw this in the 2014 umbrella movement too, where they had basically pasted an entire wall of the staircase that was close to the Legislative Council building. And it ended up being called Lennon Wall, I think, because for John Lennon, because there was some of the words from Imagine or something were, you know, our favorite song posted on there. But like,
Shelley's being sarcastic. It is not our favorite song.
yeah. Anyway, I think we don't need to talk about that right
Yeah,
now.
no.
But there were post-its of like, messages of support from different people, from different countries and stuff like that. So it became a big thing in the umbrella movement, and they kind of resurrected that for these anti-extradition bill protests, and had all this artwork up, and then along some of the pedestrian overpasses in the area, and they had been there for weeks through like rainstorms, through like lots of different protests.
There was also a memorial there for a protester who, it was unclear what happened, but he had basically climbed up scaffolding to hang up some protest art, and then police tried to get him down, and at some point he fell, and people weren't sure if it was a suicide or if just like he just fell. But so there was sort of a memorial they set up there in honor of this guy.
Yeah, I mean that he was wearing a yellow raincoat, so like
Yeah.
this like kind of a figure in a yellow raincoat became like one of the symbols.
Yeah, and so these pro-police protesters tore all of this down, and people were really upset that they tore up the memorial for this guy.
Yeah, because that, especially in Hong Kong culture, that's like not cool to
Yeah.
mess with that. I mean, there were flowers there and all this stuff, and they just like kicked everything around. And there's video of them doing this. And then they also were pretty aggressive towards journalists who were there, towards any of the anti-extradition protesters who were around. Like several times police had to basically go in and intervene and like pull like the anti-extradition protesters away to safety.
Yeah, at
because,
one
like,
point, like Joshua Wong was like behind
he was
glass
inside
doors.
Ledgeco, and then this like mob of like 50-some-year-old people, or like,
Cursing.
trying to like get in, like they were like beating against the glass, cursing him out. There's like
Flipping
a
him
photo
off.
of like an old white-haired guy flipping him off, and yeah, as somebody pointed out on Twitter that maybe the police would have preferred to have a day off because this happened on Sunday, June 30th, which is the day before,
the July 1st.
which everybody knows is going to be like a big protest day, right?
And this is why we stuck around. So that day began, that was so bizarre. So every year there's like a flag raising ceremony where the chief executive raises the Hong Kong flag and the People's Republic of China's flag. And it's supposed to be like symbolic of how great it is that Hong Kong is out from under the heel of British colonial rule and back to the motherland. except the government knew protesters would do something, so they spent
Well,
the weekend.
Protesters, a few days before, had kind of like published some of their ideas, and one of them was the June 30th overnight
Rehearsal for the flag raising ceremony?
No, it was the overnight rehearsal for the national anthem.
So basically, police had to spend the weekend, in addition to dealing with the pro-police protesters, they spent the weekend erecting like layer after layer of these massive barricades. Like, these barricades are taller than a human man.
A human man. What
Yeah.
about a...
Well, it's not necessarily bigger than a Sasquatch.
Okay. That they were... Okay.
So, and then they on the day, they deployed like 5,000 riot police.
Yeah, it was the barriers we had seen the day before, and like the night of June 30th, after the pro-police rally, there was a memorial service at the Ledgeco, so we'd gone there, and then the protesters were busily reconstructing the Lenin Wall, basically, and
Oh yeah, they restored all of the stuff.
They restored
that
all
was
of the stuff
destroyed.
and basically cleaned up all of the mess and all this stuff. But like we were there, and then we decided to kind of walk down this road to see how close we could get to the convention center where the flag raising ceremony was going to be, and like
This is like the next morning at 5 a.m. roughly. You're talking about.
No, I'm
No, it was
talking
the night
about the
before.
night.
The night before. Oh, right.
The night
okay.
before, where we were at Ledgeco, and we were like, oh, we saw the one. The
right, yeah,
police had
right, right.
cordoned off that one road, and we're like, let's just see how far we can go. And this was still half a mile away from the actual convention center, but the police had already cordoned off this entire road, closed the tunnel, put up these barricades, and then we decided not to go that far down. Remember, you took some
Oh,
you
right.
took some
'cause
footage
they,
down there.
they put up a barrier. We crossed the barrier, but we were still a few hundred yards from the police.
Well, that barrier was a line of tape.
That's true. We basically ducked under it.
Yeah.
And then we went like a third of the way towards the police, and I was like, that's probably as far as we can go without them yelling at us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the next day, we woke up before dawn to get there, because that's when supposedly protesters were going to try and do something.
Right ahead of the flag raising ceremony.
Yeah, so what we had heard before, it was going to be like an overnight thing where they were going to try to get into the square in the convention center area the night before, and then they felt like they didn't have enough people to get over there, so then they started talking about like that night as we were at that protest. Like, an interesting thing that happens is like they've been using airdrop, like to drop like information to people who are in that area. So I got like an airdrop, like plans to like go at 5:30 instead, before dawn to the convention center. So like that's how they've also been communicating with each other and with other people. Like they airdropped apologies to Hong Kongers.
And people
Yeah.
traveling here saying like, sorry that this was an unexpected thing for you,
Yeah.
for business people.
Yeah, so like if you have your airdrop turned on, then you can get like all this random stuff.
Well, so anyways, let's get to July 1st, because that was the big day that we were waiting. We kept delaying our trip for. So the previous night we had been out till like, past midnight at a protest site in Ledgeco?
And then we had decided to go back, right?
Oh yeah, go back, kind of
Yeah.
check out the barriers for the next day. But so anyways, like, we head back to the hotel, get like a few hours of sleep, because the word is that protesters are going to try and do something for the flag raising ceremony at dawn. So we leave the hotel.
At, shortly after 5 in the morning.
Yeah, it's still dark out, and as we're walking, our plan is to head to Ledgeco again. And this time, we run into a little group of riot police running over a sky bridge.
Well, they were coming out of the police headquarters, and we basically almost ran into them. And then, so we stopped and we're shooting footage of them, and Matt's shooting footage, and then we kind of just like start following them.
We decide, we might as well follow these guys.
And then they go up over the overpass onto the sky bridge, back down, and then as like they're kind of coming into formation, like under the sky bridge, suddenly we look over and there's like 2 more groups of
Yeah.
riot police coming down the road toward
Yeah.
us.
And again, supposedly there's like 5,000 riot police deployed this day. But so what was interesting about this is, so we followed them, and then we get to the protest line, or one of the protest line that was happening, and we kind of realized, like, oh wait, we're like the only people on this side of the police.
Yeah, there weren't even a lot of press on that road yet, because I think basically the police had come up this. It wasn't the main road that most people were using to get to the protest site. It was like the police had come up this road a block further down to kind of almost sneak around the protesters.
Basically, there was many different flash points on these roads where protesters would try and get down any one of a number of roads, ultimately leading towards where the flag raising ceremony was, and then police would block them off.
Yeah, so we kind of came up on the side road, and it was actually interesting that somebody saw us tweeting about this and used it to alert the protesters on site that the police were coming up this road.
Oh, that's right.
That they weren't aware of. So that was it was like kind of a tense moment because we're behind the police lines. Yeah. Then we see the protesters kind of like forming up and like behind their own barricades.
Yeah. Though the police were very polite to us, although they were saying, like, you know, it's not safe for you here. You should go on the other side of the police.
You had a very nice exchange with several of the police officers, including some of the commanding officers,
well,
right?
just when they said, like, go, you'll be safer on the other side, I'm thinking, like, okay, you guys have, like, pepper spray and rubber bullet rifles. I'm like, how is getting on that side the safer side?
Well, I mean, I think they just didn't want people behind the police lines, basically. But it was interesting to see there were several different levels of riot police, too. Like, just the guys in the blue uniforms, but they're still carrying the shields. Several of them, we saw the tear gas guns and the pepper spray cans, the rubber bullet rifles, too.
I like the rubber bullet rifles because on the handle they say less lethal.
I mean, you gotta, and they're also orange. Like, they have like these orange, you don't want to mix up the guns, I think.
Definitely don't.
Yeah, no, it's just like they're lethal, but a little bit less so.
Well, I guess they couldn't say non-lethal, technically, right?
Yeah,
right.
You still kill someone.
Yeah.
But yeah, then there was also like the officers who were in white who were kind of further back in the line. And then there were like the guys completely dressed in black with like
tactical gear. I think those are the ones that people call the Raptors, the
possibly
the special unit. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was but at first there weren't the kind of more heavily armed guys, and then they kind of started coming in as the morning wore on.
Yeah.
I really did not know what was happening. And then like we went from that road that we were on, we like walked across the back to a different road where we ended up behind police lines again. That's when they asked us to move.
Hey, do you know the name of that one guy who was like telling us like, "Hey, nice day"?
Oh, it was David Jordan.
Yeah.
So there are these two kind of former they were in the British police, I think too. So. When the British were, governing Hong Kong, but they've become a bit infamous among protesters who really hate them.
Yes.
And they're the kind of commanding officer, so they get a lot of at the scene, so they're the ones that order whatever's going to happen. So
yeah, they were there June 12th, the night the police cracked down very hard on the protest.
So there are these two guys, David Jordan, Rupert Dover, and like you'll see photos of them at the protest sites. It's like Carrie Lam, the police commissioner, like the people that they really hate, and then like also these two police officers.
Yeah, but anyway, so David Jordan was like, "Hey, nice day. How you doing?
How's it going? Wish I'd gotten a little more sleep, but yeah.
So it was, a different side.
Well, I mean, of course, they're not going to really antagonize the press
well,
first thing.
Some of the riot police did antagonize the press.
Oh, yeah, well, that was also when it got a bit more heated. Yeah. So it was interesting because they were basically trying to keep the protesters from getting to
the flag
raising ceremony. And originally the protesters had been trying to plan to go on it from the other side, but they basically got bottled up by the police right around Ledgco, so they couldn't move.
So while this was all going on, like, the flag raising ceremony is supposed to happen, but all the roads are blocked off. So we start to see like these helicopters flying over the convention center and this boat full of people sailing to the convention center. And we kind of realize like, they're getting like Carrie Lam and all the people who are actually going to witness this thing. They're like sneaking them over there by boat, which is just so terribly funny to me.
Well, what was also funny was the fact that they then announced that when we're all kind of like waiting the standoff between the protesters and the police, they go, oh, and also due to the weather, we are going to move the ceremony inside. Like the flag raising still happened outside, but all of the like officials and whatever were watching from inside the convention center on like a closed circuit television.
Yeah. And like there was a point where it did like rain a lot, but
this was
for
like
10 minutes.
Also way after they had made this announcement. When they were announcing it, it was fine.
It was nice weather.
But so then it was like they're trying to shield as much as possible, like anything disrupting the ceremony.
Yeah.
Do you remember that one point when like the ceremony was starting and the helicopters flew over with the Chinese flag the Hong Kong flag like attached? The Hong Kong flag was much smaller. Yeah. They're kind of like they're suspended from the helicopter. The helicopter's flying over, and then it flies over the protest site, and everybody starts booing.
Yeah.
And like flipping off the helicopters. So yeah.
But so eventually the police are like, okay, seriously, get out from behind us, get in front of us. So we do that, and then we're kind of walking to some different areas. And there was one street we came across where it seemed like police had forced protesters out because it was littered with like broken umbrellas, which actually was very useful for me because it started pouring rain, and I didn't have an umbrella, so I just snagged one off the ground.
Yeah.
So it's very convenient in monsoon season when the symbol of your protest is the umbrella.
So umbrellas are pretty multifunctional, right? You can use them for the rain, the sun, the tear gas, the pepper spray, and they can also protect you from cameras, seeing your face. They can be used as barricade. Like they're.
It's pretty good, yeah.
Yeah.
I guess you can also like use them as like a jousting tool.
Have they?
They haven't, but I'm just offering like a tactic that they could use in the future.
Yes. They don't have a lot of weapons against the police.
No. Although we did see like a lot of like the brick sidewalks. At some point, some protesters have been tearing up the bricks and kind of stockpiling them somewhere. I didn't see any bricks being thrown.
No, I don't think so. Although when we got to one of the streets, there was this tense moment where like the police and the protesters were standing off, and then David Jordan and a couple of officers like ran up and like wrestled away a cart of bricks away from the that was right when we got on the street, and like dragged it back behind police lines.
Yeah.
But I think we missed a lot of the, like on another street the police had actually charged the protesters, and several people got hit with batons
and were arrested too.
Yeah, so like people had gotten hit with batons on the head and were bleeding and got arrested, but that was kind of the extent of, they didn't use tear gas that morning.
No.
Not even when some of the protesters started throwing eggs at the police.
Yeah, and Matt was getting up in there filming it, and he got a little bit of egg on his face.
Yeah, it was friendly fire, huh? Like we were behind police at this point, so Matt got hit with an egg.
Yes, it bounced off of a police shield and splattered.
How did that make you feel?
Like I got the best possible camera angle.
All right, did we use that footage?
We did.
Oh, good. So it was worth something, your sacrifice. But eventually, so the flag raising ceremony basically happens. I'm sure they got whatever shot they wanted for their PR purposes.
Carrie Lam making a toast.
Oh, yeah, and she said that she will listen to the young people.
Oh, or, listen to the people more. And then some people were joking that then she immediately left without taking questions.
Yes. And also, someone was like, the young people are outside trying to get in.
I'm not sure they want to let the young people in.
Yeah.
But, yeah, so then after 8 a.m. when the flag raising ceremony had happened, it got a lot less tense. Like, police were starting to... Remember you overheard them saying... Like,
oh, yeah, like maybe we can be done by 10.
Yeah, and
get some
then...
rest.
Actually, at that point, though, somebody checked our IDs for the first time. Like, someone asked for our press badges.
Yeah.
And then they were like, okay, well, you can... One of the riot cops, he was like, well, you can take photos and videos of anything, but just don't get too close to us because it's unsafe for you to be like too close to us.
Yeah, which was good because I was about to hug a riot. I just believe in love.
Just like Marianne Williamson.
Yes. Let's not get in the Democratic primaries
No.
now.
So then,
Oh boy.
so then we kind of walk over to the main road, Harcourt, and suddenly there's like several thousand protesters there.
Yeah.
We had been kind of on these side streets where there were groups of protesters facing off against the police, but we hadn't gone to like the main road where now there are thousands of protesters there. They're police, but they're backing off, and then we're like, okay.
Yeah. So basically what's happening at this point is like it starts to, this part starts to end. A group of protesters do stay outside of the Legislative Council on Harcourt Road, but most people are heading towards the rally that was scheduled for later that day.
Yeah, so there's that annual July 1st protest parade that goes from like Causeway Bay all the way to, usually it ends like at this park that's where we are in front of the Legislative Council.
Yeah.
So then we kind of go back and like get ready to go out again in the afternoon to go to this parade.
Yeah. And it is so hot at this point, especially like in the full sun. And when we get to Victoria Park where the rally starts, basically what the police have done is they're trying desperately to make it so the rally doesn't happen, just people have to stay in this park.
Right, they're trying to turn the parade into this like stationary rally.
Because they don't want the rally to join up with the protesters still at the Legislative Council and kind of fuel them.
Yes, at this point we are hearing that the protesters at the Legislative Council are starting to try to get into the Legislative Council.
Yeah, so definite escalation. But so what this means is a bunch of people are in this park in the full sun, very
Fainting.
unpleasant. Yeah, like there are medical tents set up and like lots of people are like fainting with heat stroke and it's pretty messed up.
People are shouting. You guys are trying to get some footage and some interviews at the time. Like I'm standing with the equipment in the back and then like you can hear people shouting, "Open the gates," because the police were trying to stop them from being able to leave this park.
And eventually, like as more and more people come, like police are forced to open the gates, and so the rally begins. But then they're trying to like funnel everyone onto a single street, even though we ultimately found out there were like 500,000 people participating in the rally today. But so people are like there's so many people are beginning to spill out onto other streets, and the police are like just trying to funnel them down into a single
Trying
lane.
to kind of make it hard for, and they also made the organizers were arguing with the police over like where the parade could end up, because the police were like, we don't want it to end up to this, so they were trying to like funnel everybody to like a different spot in the central district, but it seemed like a lot of people did still end up in front of the Legislative Council. Yeah. So it was the march itself, like it definitely looked smaller than the 2 million person march, which had spilled onto two separate streets, and we did a live from there. But it was hard to kind of gauge because like the police kept trying to basically reduce it, like keep it from becoming like a big thing.
Yeah, and failing in the process.
Yeah, and as with the march we saw with the 2 million people march, there was still a lot of people from all different types of like ages, families, kind of, but it didn't feel quite as like celebratory as like the 2 million person march. I think part of that was also the weather, because it was so hot, and then like by the time and after the 2 million person march ended, like everybody was just kind of like relaxing. It kind of felt like we came across some people like playing the guitar and singing, having a sing-along in the park afterwards. Like it just felt kind of like people felt like, okay, we've accomplished something, and this felt a lot different.
Well, I don't know. When we got to Harcourt Road, the first thing I saw was a drum circle, a bunch of old guys playing drums, and they seemed pretty happy. One guy had a melodica. That was fun.
He was doing some like improv jazz.
Yeah.
But then when you walk like 200 yards around the corner,
Well, that's when.
you get to the Legislative Council building.
Well, even before we even got to there, like, we were on the side street, Lockhart Road, where the protesters had eventually just taken over because the police couldn't keep them from going there. But, like, if you walk down Lockhart Road, you end up right in front of the police headquarters. And so we, like, came across this group of protesters that, the parade was kind of ending there for these protesters. And remember, they were just, like, shouting at the police again.
Yeah, I'd forgotten that there was sort of like an attempt at a third occupation.
Yeah, so, like, they were still shouting at the police again, people flipping the police off, like, and this time it was just, like, people just ending there. So I saw a bunch of grannies there, you know, it was, but, like, it didn't seem like anything was going to happen, so then we walked around to Ledgeco.
And then that's when things start to get very interesting. So there were thousands and thousands of people around this area, like outside the Legislative Council and sort of on the main road. But then as you got closer to like the actual front of the Legislative Council, like the mood changed tremendously. It stopped being like old guys doing a drum circle, and then you got to the young guys who are actively trying to break into the Legislative Council. They were like getting carts and loading them with bricks and slamming them into the glass doors.
They had also
break
like
them.
disassembled these metal like gates or like some kind of like metal, like pretty intense metal barriers and slamming those into the glass.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was trying to get as close as I could so I could get footage. And the front of the Legislative Council public entrance is these thick glass paneled doors. And protesters were ramming things into them, basically breaking the glass and trying to pry open those doors. And I was trying to get footage of this. And this is the first time that protesters actually tried to stop me from shooting something related to the protest. Mm-hmm. And so they were blocking my camera with their hands and then with umbrellas. And I did end up getting some footage for which you can see in our recent China Uncensored episode, but it was very difficult. And I think the tone had changed because when the protesters try to stop media from filming, then it suddenly feels pretty different.
I think some other media had the same, experience with the protesters getting more aggressive about blocking the cameras. And it wasn't just about not showing people's faces, because you were actually not even filming people's faces. You were just trying to film the barricade being smashed
also,
through.
everyone had masks on.
Yes. I mean, but at the same time this is happening, this guy that I recognized from one of the photos, where he's like shirtless, always shirtless, and then he was the other night in front of the police headquarters, like throwing eggs at the police headquarters, and then like he comes up to us and like gives up all of us goggles.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it was very fragmented. Like there was like people like right at the front lines trying to break in who were like, trying to keep us away. And then like a step or two back, there were people giving us goggles and like water.
Yeah. I mean, like I think it wasn't like the protesters had all suddenly turned violent, but it was like, there was definitely like a shift in, well, also when we were running to Ledgeco, some people started clapping because they were
pretty cool.
They were like, oh, like it was like the media coming through, like because most people like were still kind of like the media's report, like they wanted what's happening in Hong Kong to go out to an international audience, so they're like very like clapping, whatever. Of course, these are also the people who can't see what's happening at Ledgeco right now.
Yeah.
So it was very like different, and I think at this point I was like really sensing the difference between the last march and this march, where the frustration of like people feeling like they'd been blocked from protesting the flag raising ceremony, the weather was hot, everybody was like had been there a long time, and like the feeling of like we could march all we want and it's not going to do anything. Yeah,
the feeling that we tried to do the non-violent thing and the government didn't listen to anything. Yeah. So now we're going to escalate things.
Yeah, I mean, not just at Ledgeco, too, like with the people yelling at the police again at the police headquarters. Like, that is not how the last protest ended,
That's definitely true. So eventually the protesters managed to break through the glass doors, and then they're met by these, like, metal shuttered doors, and that really slows them down for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, actually, they had broken through a lot of the glass, and even when we were first there were already people trying to get the metal shutters up.
Yeah. And that slowed them down for like an hour or two. And then there's like rumors, well, people are saying like there's police on the inside who have like raised flags. We're like saying they're going to pepper spray people. Anyone who enters the Legislative Council is going to be arrested.
There was at one point like smoke started coming out of the bottom of this metal barricade that they were trying to lever up.
Oh.
And so everybody was like thinking it was tear gas. I think it turned out to be actually a smoke bomb or something like that.
Oh.
And so people were prepared. Everybody was saying that like
They were getting goggles.
It's
and
going to be
supplies to the
violent.
front
It's going to be
lines.
violent as soon as they break through. The police are there.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, after the fact, I saw footage from cameras from press who were inside with the police, and you could see these lines of riot police, like, right up against the door.
Mm-hmm.
So everybody's kind of braced for this confrontation. The protesters get the metal door up, and then suddenly the police start to retreat.
Yeah, and that's, I don't know, that kind of creeped me out, like what happened. Like,
Yeah.
they eventually get all the doors open, and then just like hundreds of protesters are able to go inside, you know, the seat of the government, and there is zero police presence
They have
anywhere.
completely retreat. The footage that I watched later, you can see like the police are right up against the door, then like they like just start going back, like they just start retreating
gone.
right away, and then by the time most of the protesters get in, there's no police anywhere.
Yeah.
Right. And like at 11 p.m., we're standing outside, right outside those doors that they just broken through, and we're just seeing protesters streaming through right into the Legislative Council office.
And I think a lot of this is possible is because on the other side of the building, there's still like thousands of the
I think
rally
there's like
protesters.
tens of thousands of people out there.
Yeah.
Like, like that. They're most of them are not involved in this at all.
Yeah.
And probably they don't really necessarily
Know what's
know what's happening at LegCo, but there is a sense that like the more people there are, the less likely there can be violence because the police won't be able to like charge everybody.
Yeah.
There's 30,000 police, I think, in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
Period.
But what eventually we heard, and like I found particularly amazing, is just like as far as violent protests go, this was not that violent.
I mean,
it was a very targeted destruction of just government property.
There was vandalism and property damage.
Definitely, but just of the Legislative Council. Like there are high-end malls nearby. No one's looting those. It was just graffiti in the
No.
Legislative
And
Council.
When the protesters were inside, we didn't see this personally because we decided not to go into Legislative Council.
Right, because it was because the police had been very clear about, we will arrest you if you illegally enter this building. What we didn't want to do was be put at legal risk in Hong Kong for committing a trespassing crime or aiding and abetting or anything, because you never know what the Hong Kong authorities are going to do in the future. So I was like, these people who were going in, I was thinking at the time, these people who were going in and to the Legislative Council office, they've been told they're going to be arrested. Like every single person who's going in is going to face consequences for this if they get caught. And then we're there live streaming with no masks on. And I felt like that was a pretty significant risk to go in.
I mean, there were plenty of press inside, but of course we are not local Hong Kong media.
We're also not CNN.
We're not CNN or the New York Times or like these kind of big name media. So, like I totally understand that, and also we want to be able to come back to Hong Kong. Yeah, we want to minimize the likelihood that like they would for some reason target us. So
that being said, we all wanted to go in.
No, I really, really wanted to go inside. But, you know, and I kind of like the next day when we saw some of the footage of what was happening inside, I was kind of like, wish we could have seen that.
Yeah.
But,
so basically, like inside, even though there was like security cameras were destroyed and lots of graffiti, like anything that was like antiques that were inside the Legislative Council, like they put post-it notes up that said, please do not destroy, and everything there was fine. The bookstore was kind of left
the library,
untouched.
they just like had put barriers up so that nobody would like get in and destroy the books or anything.
Yeah, and even like the refrigerators where there were drinks, there was like a little box for money, and there was like a sign saying, you know, we are not robbers, we are Hong Kongers.
Yeah, like that we pay for, like, yeah, we're not going to take stuff without paying. They they had like that little basket of money. This was in the canteen, basically. We actually had been there, remember?
Yeah.
A few years ago, the kind of like cafeteria for.
Yeah, I did not enjoy my meal there.
That's the important thing to remember.
Sat with me.
Yeah, but then when they got into the Legislative Council, they were spray painting messages on the walls. They had spray painted. There was like this seal of Hong Kong up above the podium, and they spray painted over the part that said People's Republic of China, but had left the part that said Hong Kong Special Administrative Government intact. So that's a message.
Oh, and someone was also brought the British colonial flag.
Yeah, and draped it over the podium. And like some people are kind of like, does that mean people want to go back to colonial, Hong Kong? They want the British to come back? Not really. It's kind of almost a troll. I was reading some analysis of this from Hong Kongers, and they were like, people use the flag. A large part of it is because they don't have like a Hong Kong flag that's not associated with the PRC or the UK, and the British flag, Hong Kong flag, just like pisses off like the Beijing authorities and the Hong Kong government. So they kind of they like to use it because it's kind of like a trolling, essentially. Yeah.
Well, because especially like with the whole message of Western imperialism, to be like, hey, being a British colony was way better than being part of the People's Republic of China.
Yeah. We're not saying come back, but so it was interesting to see that. And then one of the things that was spray painted in the Legislative Council that I think was very symbolic, maybe, or like a good point, was someone had spray painted, "You were the one who taught me that peaceful protests don't work." Like the idea that the frustration of having marched in the streets several times, having sat in, done all this peaceful stuff, and for the last scene that the government's not responding at all, or kind of just digging in. That was kind of what led to these kids saying, okay, well, this is it. We have to escalate. We have to do something to make the government pay attention. Yeah. And I mean, it's very, I think, divisive in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, before we get into that, just to wrap it up, eventually the police did give a deadline. Everyone has to be out. And most of the protesters left, but then there were 4 who stayed inside and who were I'm going to get arrested.
Yeah. What was interesting too was this is the whole leaderless protest thing, right? Where they kind of had breached the doors. They'd come in. Everybody knew that nothing like this had been done before. At first, it seemed like they wanted to be the Sunflower Movement of Taiwan, where there were these young people who occupied this Taiwanese legislature for 3 weeks and then got concessions from the government. But then people were that's not going to work here. The Hong Kong government is not the Taiwan government. Beijing is not Taiwan.
No.
And so there was a lot of kind of chaoticness about this, about what do we do next, and people being
I think the word you're looking for is chaos.
Yes, chaos. There's a lot of chaos about this, and people were okay, what are we going to do? Are we going to stay? Are we going to go? Police had given that midnight deadline, so most people were and then people were we have to respect individual people's decisions, which is how those 4 people you said had ended up wanting to stay and become kind of martyrs for the cause in a way. They were facing 10 years in prison.
Yeah.
For this.
One of the guys was a young father.
Yeah,
too.
he was a 24-year-old guy who was a dad, and he was I don't know what I can do for my child growing up here. I hope one day they can see what I've done and kind of make the decision for themselves whether they think what I've done is right, but I have to do this for my kid.
Yeah.
And so there was this dramatic moment where people were kind of pulling back, everybody else was leaving, people were crying, and then suddenly 100 protesters rushed back into the Legislative Council.
We're not going to leave anyone behind.
Yeah, so they start chanting, "We leave together." Basically the idea that everyone leaves together, and they literally physically pull these 4 people out of the chamber. Some of them in the videos you can see they're grabbing onto the podiums to try to like stay, and like people like just like carry them out. And there was a pretty like moving interview with a reporter from The Stand, Hong Kong, which she was like asking this young girl like why they were going back in, and the girl was like, you know, we heard on Telegram, the social messaging app everybody's using, that like there are 4 people who want to stay inside, but we don't want to, and you know, they told us we should respect the decision of people, but like then we discussed it among ourselves and we decided that we can't leave anybody. Like we come in together, we leave together, we are going back in to get them. And then the reporter was like, aren't you afraid because it's almost midnight? Like, aren't you afraid if you go back in, you won't be able to come back out? And she's like, we're really afraid, but we're more afraid that we won't be able to see these protesters anymore. Like that's even worse than being arrested, is like knowing we left these people inside. And, you know, at this point, the girl's crying, the reporter's crying. It's like, you know, pretty emotional.
And I think a lot of this was influenced by, at this point, there had been 3 suicides over the course of, well, definitely 2 suicides, one a little questionable what happened. And there was sort of like this sense of like, you know, people can't be killing themselves for this movement. We all need to be here together.
Yeah, like on the Telegram groups, after especially the 2nd and 3rd suicide, like people were just constantly posting like, if you need help, these are like who to talk to. Don't like keep your spirits up. Don't let, you know. And I think like there was some concern about like suicide clusters, and like this is like a research phenomenon that actually happens. Like if you publicize suicides, like more people tend to do it. But in Hong Kong culture, like that's not kind of like the way people were looking at it. Like people were still kind of like seeing these people as like martyrs. So there was like a real risk that if you kind of
had some mental problems,
you're depressed or whatever, you see this, like it could push you over the edge. So, but like I think even the young people themselves, the protesters, were realizing this is a problem. So that a lot of the messages became like, we're all in this together. Don't leave us. You have to stay with us until the end. Mm-hmm. Even when we went to LegCo in the beginning, there was a big banner that they had hung that said, "Don't leave the crew," in English, and it was about this idea that like we don't leave anybody behind anymore. Like we're all sticking together. Yeah, no more martyrs.
But so now is the whole debate on what the students did.
Well, I mean, before we get to that, the police cleared the area.
Oh, yeah. They did eventually clear.
Yeah.
And there was
so around midnight,
a lot of clearing.
the police did move in around shortly after midnight. Tear gas very quickly cleared the entire area of protesters. But at the time, there were already no protesters in the Legislative Council anymore. So nobody got arrested because the police couldn't find anybody.
And then finally everyone was like, okay, we can finally get some sleep. People had been up like all night before. Brass had been up. It's time for some sleep.
And then like even the protesters were trying to get home. They're going home on the subways. Like people left coins on top of the ticket machine so that people would be able to buy like paper tickets and go through instead of using their octopus cards. Like
so they couldn't be tracked.
So they couldn't be tracked by the government. So like people were leaving coins for the protesters. Like people on the trains were holding the doors so all the protesters could get in, and then like clapping once they got on. Like somebody told the story of like being in a taxi, like a reporter like being in a taxi to go back, and how like the taxi driver picked up a bunch of protesters too, so he could get them all home safely. So so it looks like it's ending. Yeah.
And finally everyone can get some sleep. And then Carrie Lam decides to have a 4 a.m. press conference.
Yeah. Fortunately, we were not on the press alert, so we did not get that text at 2:50 in the morning.
Because it sounds like it was a pretty useless press conference. She was basically like, I condemn violence. Goodbye. Like,
I condemn the violence of the protesters, but I am willing to listen to the youth. And then reporters asked her a lot of harsh questions, some of which got censored from the official like government transcript.
So nobody will ever talk about what those questions were.
Yeah, it's not like the Hong Kong Journalists Association was like, what's up with censoring these questions from reporters?
Yeah, but so now there's the whole debate about is what the protesters did a good or a bad thing?
Did they go too far? Did they play into the Chinese government's hands, you know?
Like, give the government a chance to say, like, oh, see, these guys are violent. We have to crack down.
Basically, it turns into like a PR war between like the pro-democracy people
And the pro-Beijing
and the
side.
pro-Beijing side.
Like, will the protesters lose that sort of mainstream support that saw 2 million people
I was
come on the
actually
street?
pretty scared about that. Like,
Yeah.
that night when we were outside, like watching the protesters streaming and outside of Legco, I mean, remember but they were still so like polite and nice and caring. Like even as they're like doing all this like kind of destruction on the inside, like
Except for the guys who are like trying to block Matt's camera.
well, I mean, now
or
I'm
the people
talking
who
about
are stockpiling bricks and like trying to cover that up as well.
Right, but I think also that was a pretty small minority of people.
Yeah.
there are some people who are asking us whether this was like a false flag operation, whether there could have been like plants in.
It didn't seem like it because there was just they were.
I mean,
they were
I've seen
all
some
kind of
videos where
engaged.
people were like, there seemed to be some bad actors. Like, there was like a video of one of the protesters, like, there's been some pro-democracy legislators trying to block them earlier in the day from storming the glass. And then, like, some guy came over and tackled one of them. So that's people were like, that guy seems like maybe a bad actor
Yeah.
or something like that.
And then there was like a weird thing where like the Hong Kong police released like this video of them saying like, oh, protesters have breached the building at like 9 p.m. But like the guy's watch says 5 p.m. And so people are like, oh, is this something that they like pre-recorded, that they were good, like that they planned
that they
this?
planned and like were like, I do think that of all of the kind of like, is this a false flag stuff, like the fact that the police retreated, like they tried to explain, no, like we just didn't have the manpower, you know, but when you watch them clear the place after midnight
With tear gas,
like very efficiently, very organized,
they had manpower.
they could have put up a fight there at the door, and that's what everybody was expecting, really.
Right. And that's why I think we all, when we saw the protesters streaming in that evening, we all kind of had a bad feeling about this. Like,
Yeah.
The fact that there are no police here is worrying.
It was very creepy.
And yeah, I mean, I basically think that it was a PR move by the Hong Kong government to just let the protesters be destructive so they could use it in their PR war.
And that's
against the
something
movement.
the Communist Party has done before too. Like the whole idea of like you give your enemies enough room to like make a mistake and then you capitalize on that weakness. But yeah, I mean, I think the protesters also knew it couldn't last, right? Like that's why they were kind of this talk switched from we're going to occupy the house to like we're just going to make our statement and leave. We were seeing people coming out with like spray paint cans and stuff like that. This guy came over and gave us eye wash, like saline solution to use in case like there was tear gas. So people obviously knew that the police were going to come and clear this place and use tear gas. Now they have a reason to use tear gas. There's been like property destruction, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's still unclear, like, whether or not this has affected how the mainstream Hong Kong society feels about the protest.
Well, the first indication I had that this might not work for the Hong Kong government was like, remember the guy at McDonald's?
Oh, yeah. Like, I saw a guy later that night at McDonald's, and he was asking me what was happening. And I was like, yeah, the protesters, like, broke into Legco. And he just laughed.
And he was like not a protester. He was like,
Yeah, just like some middle-aged Hong Kong guy.
yeah. So I was like, huh, that's like an unexpected. Because I also thought that like maybe this is where the sentiment, because it happened in the umbrella movement where like the sentiment kind of turned against
The
protesters eventually because they were just like clogging up the city for so long and people were like just, you know,
Also, like, all of the press footage, like the interview you mentioned from the stand that, like, shows, like, sort of the emotional side of the protesters, how they didn't destroy, like, the antiques and how they were paying for drinks. Like, I wonder if they're going to be able to get away with it.
And, well, I think that was very, like, I've seen that several times, like the video being posted of, like, the no man left behind thing. Because a lot of people feel for the fact that a lot of them are, like, 15, 16, 17-year-old kids. To see them kind of having this, like going back in for their comrades, like, yeah, it feels very emotional.
And then you juxtapose that with Carrie Lam, And that's the thing. Everyone hates Carrie Lam, and she has botched this so badly with every press interview she's done. She's just dug a hole for herself as being just so unlikable. And so I think a lot of Hong Kong people are really frustrated at her and the government for not listening.
And the people I've talked to and the conversations I've been seeing, like this is a day later now, have a lot of people have been like, we don't support the violence. And this is kind of like also the position of like the pro-democracy legislators and like the more moderate kind of...
Like Joshua Wong was on this side.
Yeah, like Joshua Wong had this like major like tweeting about this, and like basically everybody is saying you have to put this in. We don't support like also calling it violence. Like the Global Times called it mob violence in an article that came out, but like nobody got hurt. In terms of like the protesters didn't hurt anybody. They did vandalize legislative council, and there was a lot of property destruction. I mean, we watched them tear the steel like frames off of the doors, and then like, you know, looking at it now, like all the glass is shattered. Yeah. At that front, like kind of like drum area, that's like a semicircular glass thing. Like all the glass is gone, but. Like, so there's like a good deal of property damage. The Hong Kong government estimates 10 million Hong Kong dollars worth of property damage. And the Legislative Council probably won't be able to sit for the next 2 weeks. So they're basically done for the summer until October now. But
I mean, early summer vacation.
Yeah,
right?
I'm sure they're crying. But like the protesters didn't hurt anybody. There wasn't actually any violence on people. And like people kept saying, we don't say that this is the right thing to do for them to have destroyed government property, for them to have broken into the Legislative Council, but you have to put this in the context of what's been happening over the last few months and also over the last 5 years in terms of how the Hong Kong government has handled protesters trying peacefully to protest.
All that's happened is like they have made it more and more difficult for Hong Kong society to have a say in the government.
Yeah, and like the like ability to elect representatives that don't get disqualified. They've even started like not even letting certain people run. We met Agnes Chow from Demosisto like back in 2014, and then like she tried to run for a position in. And then they just like stopped her from running altogether. They've disqualified political parties, so people are very like kind of cynical about that route of getting stuff done.
And when the government becomes unaccountable to the people,
it's the whole thing about the broken system again, where like they have to be accountable to Beijing and to the Chinese Communist Party before they can be accountable to the Hong Kong people, and it's not working. And it's interesting because, like, basically the way that the pro-democratic people are laying out is like, this is what we did, this is how you stopped us from doing that. Like, we tried marching in the streets, you stopped us from doing that. You ignore us when we do like the peaceful marches. Like, you have like a quarter of the Hong Kong population coming out in one march, and you don't respond to that. Like, we've tried everything else. Like, we've already tried everything else. So, like, it's kind of like this, they're trying to, like, string this, like, thing about, like, we don't approve of the destruction, but don't pretend that, like...
It came out of nowhere.
Yeah, it came out of nowhere, like... And that, like, this could have been avoidable, you know? So it's interesting, and I actually think that... I've seen some interesting things. Like, there's a online poll from a business newspaper, the Economic Times, the Hong Kong Economic Times, and they asked, you know, protesters entered Legisco and vandalized. Do you agree with this way of expressing themselves? And then, like, a vast majority of people said yes. Like, right now there's like 250,000 some people who have taken this poll. 77% say they agree. 15% say they don't agree. And then like 8% say they don't have an opinion. So, and this is not like, this is not young people. Like, the person who, tweeted about this Kong Sung-gan, he's been like a protester and supporter of the protesters, but he said that he was alerted to the poll by friends of his who are moderate and who are not, middle-aged and moderate. They don't really go to the they're the kind of people who go on the mass protests, but they wouldn't like go occupy the police headquarters and that kind of stuff. And then he said like all of the people we've talked to kind of is the same. Like even like, and we've seen like other reporters, like one reporter, Carrie Lam from South China Morning Post, said the same thing among her friend group. Like, it seems like people understand. Like even if they're not like that was the right thing to do, they're like, we understand why. So it seems like maybe the Hong Kong government's PR move might not turn out the way they thought.
Well, so clearly this is not the end of this story. So, I'm definitely glad we did decide to stay till July 1st. Though, now I think it is. I am ready to go back to New York.
I mean, we don't know what's going to happen this weekend, Chris. We could stay a little longer.
I want to go home.
I had a dream last night that the Hong Kong protesters somehow carried on the protests in some other foreign country, and we had to jump on a plane and follow them.
I mean, I am as exhausted as you guys are, but a part of me wishes that we could stay to kind of see what happens next, because I feel like the fascinating thing about being here is that I'm always surprised.
Yeah, nobody has ever predicted correctly what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Even that night, July 1st, it's that we were talking to some other reporters who were like, yeah, the PLA is probably going to come in here with live bullets.
No, that freaked me out. When they were local photojournalists, and they were like, this is going to be bad.
Because the PLA garrison is only a few hundred yards away.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure they have a lot of troops stationed in that building.
But it did make me think, this is our cue to leave.
Well, I mean, that definitely freaked me out, because I was like, maybe this can calm down now, because the protesters have had a release in a sense. They got into the LegCo, they were able to make their statement. It feels less frustrated now. The tension definitely went down. But I was like, this is before the police clearance. But then I was talking to them, I was like, oh my God, could this turn really bad suddenly? So far, indications are that the state-run media are kind of the Hong Kong central government needs to handle their own, issues.
They're hanging out Carrie Lam to dry.
Well, they're this is an important part of one. They don't want to breach one country, two systems to that extent. That would just.
It would ruin any possibility of that working with Taiwan.
And just their reputation internationally would just take another nosedive. So right now they're still emphasizing that the Hong Kong police, the Hong Kong central government should handle this. Mm-hmm. So I don't think that there's imminent, danger of the PLA marching through the streets, at least not on July 2nd as we record this podcast.
Yeah. But yeah, it was amazing. It was an amazing historic moment, and I'm glad we were here to witness it. And I'm glad so many of you listening watched our lives, watched our videos, and really offered up a lot of support to the people of Hong Kong. And that really meant something to the people here, that there was an international community watching and sending their love.
I mean, I think I talked about this one on the lives, but not a podcast. So after the 2 million person march, there was a girl who was asking me, we were interviewing protesters, and she asked me where we were from, and when we said we were from New York, she's like, do people in America care about what's happening? So I pulled up one of our YouTube videos that we had done and showed her all the supportive comments from people to the people of Hong Kong, and then she was just amazed by that. They really want people to still paying attention, because what will happen when
the media go away.
Yeah, when we're going away, the media is going to go away.
Yeah, but I'm really glad that we were able to be here and let people around the world on our channel see what's happening here. Although after 19 days of non-stop episodes and live broadcasts, I am ready to get on a plane.
Well, I think we need to go. Well, personally, I've already scheduled a Cantonese lesson, because I feel that was one thing that if we had been able to understand more, You know, it would have been more useful. And also, I think we need to do some of that hostile reporting training.
Oh yeah,
Oh, yeah,
how press is supposed to deal with situations where there could be like military crackdowns or.
Yeah, because that podcast we did with Terrell Jones about Tiananmen, he's like, oh, back then we didn't have this kind of training. And like while we were doing the podcast with him, I was thinking, like, is this a thing now that like people are supposed to have? Like nobody told us we were supposed to get this training.
Yeah. What do we do if like there are gunshots? I don't know. But yeah, so thank you for joining us on this incredible journey, and you know we'll still be keeping an eye on the situation in Hong Kong because this is not over yet.
No, I mean, I think this is, in some ways, it's just the beginning.
It's not the beginning of the end, but the end of the beginning. That was in a movie I saw a long time ago about time travel.
Yeah, it doesn't quite fit the situation, but I totally get what you're going for.
Yeah.
So you're saying this is maybe Infinity War, but not Endgame.
Oh, that's deep. I'll have to think about that for the next.
I was actually thinking about that since I had watched Endgame for the first time recently, and then like the whole Thanos thinking he's inevitable, and everybody kind of treats the Chinese Communist Party like they're inevitable.
Yeah, and then pretty soon, dust.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know who's going to snap their fingers, but...
Yeah. I hope that's not a major spoiler for anyone listening. And with that, thanks again for joining us. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell.
I'm Shelley Zhang.
And I'm Matt Gnezda.
We're signing off from Hong Kong.
See you next time.